I'm Chris McDonough, a retired homicide detective. I've interviewed thousands of people, from serial killers to ministers. Welcome to the interview room.
We're going to call this a TED Talk because we have with us today absolutely three amazing guests. Mr. Kevin Sullivan. He's an author, a writer of history and true crime, and he's the author of 16 books. You can find him on Amazon, and he's a former investigative journalist for both print and online media. He's a recognized authority on serial sex killer Ted Bundy. Indeed, his breakout book, The Bundy Murders, a comprehensive history published by McFarlane in 2009, was the catalyst that brought him much attention in the true crime world, leading to appearances on numerous radio programs and, of course, documentaries both in the United States, United Kingdom, and worldwide. I have to tell you, Kevin is probably the world-renowned expert on everything that Ted Bundy did. He's been interviewed by law enforcement, by news, you name it. Kevin has been spoken to because he got that close to understanding Ted Bundy. And of course, Francine Bardole, inventor of the Bardole method. We love Francine. Oh, I can't say enough about her. She too is world renowned for her ability of forensics. And then we've got a special guest, a gentleman by the name of Larry Tucker. So let's welcome our wonderful, esteemed panel today. I tell you, it's great to have each and every one of you here, guys and gals. Miss Francine, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you.
Kevin, thank you so much for carving a little time out of your schedule for this TED Talk. I cannot wait to hear all the information you have.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm looking to to engaging with you all in a good conversation about Ted Bundy.
Awesome. And Larry,
can y'all hear
tell
me?
us a little bit.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we got you. You're good. You're in. Larry, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this conversation.
Well, I am 54 years old. I've got a wonderful wife and two boys. They're in their early 20s. I ended up in this conversation because my best little buddy when I was young, his name's Josh, and his mother was dating Ted. And so Ted was around for a period of time, around Josh and I quite a bit, and around my mother. And yeah, that's how it all started. It's definitely not something I go and wear on my sleeve. You just don't talk about that stuff to people without.
You're about ready to start wearing it.
Know.
You know,
I know.
Welcome to this esteemed panel here. And so, Kevin, let me tee it up for you and kind of drive us through this. So Josh is friends with Larry.
Yes.
And his mom, Leslie. So tell us that connection and how it circled back over into Francine?
Well, Bundy met Leslie in the spring/summer of 1975 when Paul Van Dam, a political guy in Salt Lake City, was having a party. That's how they
A
met.
little technical difficulty. We lost Kevin virtually. However, we do have him on the phone. Kevin, can you hear me okay?
Oh, yes, I can hear you fine.
Perfect. So let's explore the relationship between Larry and Josh, and how did that relationship then correlate back into Francine? Tell us about that, if you will.
Well, Francine knew Leslie. Now, some people say her name is pronounced Knudsen or Knudsen. I've heard it both ways. They knew each other, and Francine's son was Larry, and Leslie's child was Josh, and they were friends. And so when Bundy came into Leslie's life, then what happened was Bundy did with them as he had done with his girlfriend in Washington State, Liz Klopfer, and her son, and her daughter, and he became a surrogate father to the child, and a, like, you might want to say, surrogate husband, or like as if he was almost a husband to Liz. Well, the same thing happened there with Leslie. Not nearly as long; they were together for months, but he did things with Josh, and he incorporated him into his life just like he had done with others, and so it would be more like a family setting. So I'm sure that pleased Leslie a lot, and I understand it. But there were things there that were just dark, and as I say in my book, The Bundy Murders, this relationship too was destined to fail. But that's what brought these four people together, and Larry's got some really, really interesting stories about things that happened when he was with Ted that at the time made, no sense. It just seemed like, well, Ted's doing this for whatever reason, but it would turn out to be something very important once they discovered who Ted was. For example, one night when he took Larry and Josh to the drive-in, he said he had to go to the restroom or something, or the place to get popcorn, whatever. And he was gone a long time, so the boys went looking for him, and they found him. This is really weird, and now makes a lot of sense. They found him standing at the women's restroom, watching the women come and go. Well, this is exactly what he did at Lake Sammamish on July 14th, 1974, when he grabbed his second victim there in the afternoon. He caught her coming out of the restroom. Now that we know this about Bundy, you have to think about this. What was he doing? I mean, he couldn't abduct anyone, but it is clear that, he had the boys in the car, but it is clear that he was morphine and was having a desire to do this. And so he couldn't help himself, and he just wanted to go and see the women coming back and forth, salivating inwardly, no doubt, but at the same time, knowing he can't do anything about it. What I'd love to know is that once he went home that night to take the boys home, did he go back out? And that was a standard for Bundy. But this is the relationship they had. And of course, as Francine told me, that the way Bundy conducted his life, being gone a lot at night, and he was drinking heavily, and these things were just, Leslie would call up Francine and say, well, can you watch, Josh tonight, because maybe he and Larry can play because I have a date with Ted. And then more often than not, she would have to cancel that, and of course that would bring a lot of frustration into her life. So, but this is kind of how all that functioned. And in retrospect, it's extremely interesting to look at the behavior of Bundy. But he, without question, and I think Larry would say this, he was good to him, and he was good to Josh. And So, you know, I mean, it's just Bundy was a strange individual.
Yeah,
So,
and we're going to get into that. That's fascinating. So, Francine, question for you. You were friends with Leslie, and so help, kind of paint the picture on what those dynamics were, your neighbors, or how that, and then we got to hear going to the drive-in, which Kevin just talked about, Larry. I mean, you're sitting here right now to tell us what that was like. So, Francine, starting with you up there.
Well, okay. So Larry was probably, I think, around 7 years old, 7, 8 years old, right around
And
there.
your mom, so
I'm his
everybody
mom.
knows.
Yeah.
Hey,
Larry is
sorry
my
to hear
son.
that, Larry.
He's my
We love
son.
Francine. So,
Thank you. And I was kind of I just love kids, and I was kind of the mom on the street that, if people needed somebody to watch their kid or whatever, they'd come to my house, and I had a neat backyard with a playhouse and games downstairs, and I was kind of the house where kids would come and play. Josh and Larry met each other when Leslie moved in to my friend's duplex. I was babysitting my friend, who her parents owned the duplex. She lived in the duplex with her son, and her son would come, and I would babysit him. He was an adorable kid, just loved him, and this is how I met Leslie and Josh. Is they kind of exchanged information, and I was happy to watch Josh, and Larry and him were the same age, and they got along so well, and Josh was just a darling kid. And I loved having him around, and he was Larry's best friend, and it was wonderful. And I knew Leslie first, very intelligent woman. She taught school. She was wonderful, very well put together, and from a very good family, it appeared, and everything. And she was just a neat lady, and I had no questions about anything. And then when she met Ted, Ted was living with her and moved in with her. And why would I question Ted? I mean, this woman is a real upstanding woman, and, very bright. And Ted was a law student and going to the University of Utah, and he was handsome and he was engaging. He was just a very friendly and seemed to me a very caring person. And I really got to know him because he would sometimes watch Josh, or he'd take Josh places, and Josh wanted Larry to go with them. And so Larry and Josh were like a little team. And so when they went places, they went together with Ted. And when Ted took them, they went together. And so I had no question that there would be any issue or anything. And in fact, he was so nice. And I don't know, Larry, you might remember this. You got mad at me and ran away from home. I think you were on your bike, weren't you? I must have done something terrible because you ran a few blocks away. But Ted went looking for him. I don't know that I had a car at that time, but I know that Ted helped find him. And I'll let Larry tell you about that story. But that's how I came into the picture. Is we were just kind of like neighbors and friends, kids that played together. And Ted was, man, he was not only good looking, he was a law student, and he cared about my son. So I'll let Larry take it from there on your runaway.
Yeah, the runaway incident. There's parts of it I remember pretty well, but it used to be a Kmart. Remember those stores? It's now a Walmart now, but I just took off on my bike and thought I'd, be all independent and run away. And I remember him coming up to me and saying, let's get you back home, and, put my bike in the car and brought me back home. But yeah, the incident at the drive-in is probably one of the more vivid memories I have of Ted.
Tell us about that.
We were, it was just the three of us. Leslie wasn't there. So Ted, put us in the car, and we went to the Redwood Drive-In is what it's called. He said he was going to be back. I don't know, I'm going to go get some popcorn or something. But it took so long, and we finally, we didn't want to do the wrong thing. We're supposed to stay put, but we're like, we got to go find him. So we got out of the car. I just can't remember how long it was, but it was a long time. And I go into the snack bar, centrally located in the theater property, and there's a line that kind of would wrap around to the women's bathroom, and he was standing there by the women's restroom. And sometimes I'm standing there waiting for my wife, so it's not too I guess it might not look too suspicious, but he wasn't waiting there. He didn't have a date, he wasn't waiting on a wife or something, he was there just scoping it out. I don't know. I think Kevin's right. I think that could have really been a big night for him mentally, and to realize, yeah, I'm stuck with these kids. I can't be doing this. And to take us back home that evening, he's probably all wound up inside. And
Well, Bundy talked about, he talked about the thing that would rise in him, and like an entity or whatever. And he talked about that building pressure. Well, without question, that pressure had to have been building. And that's why he went, and it could have been set off by a particular woman he saw. Bundy once said, I saw this woman and I knew I just had to have her. So he could have spotted a particular woman. And then it started to build. And then here comes all these women back and forth. And at that moment, without question, I believe that was rising within him. And I think, we can't prove it and we'll never know. But I think he likely went back out that night to hunt for a victim. Whether he got one that night, I don't know. But when that is building, when that thing was building within him, when that pressure, it was something that he would not try to put out of himself. He would just flow with it and he would go with it. I remember once he said he picked up a hitchhiker, and when he was telling the story, this writer, he laughed. He said, I was in my Reformation period. And he said, I picked up this girl and I didn't have a desire to murder her, but, and we went somewhere and we had sex, and he said the sex was really good, spontaneous. And he said in the midst of it, he said he could almost feel a little pressure to take her life, but he decided not to. So, in the next morning, he just dropped her off near to where she lived. But he did say that had this happened just a couple weeks after that, he feels he would have killed her, because he said that entity, that pressure, just was not as active at that time. And I think he was trying to prove to himself that he could take a stance and not murder somebody. But even the thing about Bundy, and he's a mystery, he's an enigma. He didn't know why he was like this, but he never certainly fought against it either. And he was a killing machine. And if you look at this woman that he was having a good time with and having sex with, you have to think, why did that even cross his mind if he was not being driven by that entity? And yet it did. And so for Bundy, this whole thing was about murder. And, it's a mystical thing with killers like this, the place where they murder them and dump them. And they are not always the same location, but they become very special to these people, and those places become very mystical and a part of them. And they also consider those that they murder a part of them. So they just live on a different mental plane than most humans inhabiting this planet. And it's just a real mystery of why he was this way. The scientists and things like that, they can do studies on psychopaths and they can see changes within their brains and when certain things are happening. And that tells them the physiological things that are happening, say, within the brain when that occurs. But it doesn't tell them why they are that way. And I remember when I was writing my book, The Bundy Murders, which was originally published in 2009, and the publisher had republished it in 2020 with some new information that I added to the book in an expanded edition. But the thing about people like this is that, I mean, if you study the case of Bundy, I remember once that, and I was friends with Dr. Al Carlisle, who has passed away. He died in 2018. And a number of the people I worked with passed away. But I remember I was looking at where Bundy would hunt women, and I was noticing that some of these women would say when they first encountered Bundy, and he was hunting, that his eyes looked normal. He was conversing with them. But on some occasions, and this happened at Central Washington State College, where he ultimately got Susan Rancourt, but there was a woman who testified, I believe this was Jane Curtis, that even though like his eyes were normal at the beginning, he had a sling on his arm on crutches. He had heavy books, and he had some packages that he had made with covered with paper and tied with strings. And of course, women are going to say, normal women, do you need some help with that? And so this one lady did, and she didn't mention anything about his eyes being abnormal. But as they got halfway to where his car was, which was parked in the very most secluded place on campus, by a railroad trestle where there was no parking, there was high grass, and no buildings in the immediate vicinity. Just one building like 150 feet away. As she turned to talk to him and looked at him as they were going to the car, she noticed his eyes had changed, and they were very weird. So as I was writing the book, I thought I need to find out about that. And I contacted Al Carlisle, and I asked him about that. And he said, well, there are numerous studies. He's talked to numerous women that he had interviewed who were attacked by men, whether it was going to be murder or not. Maybe it was just rape. Now, I don't say just rape, but with no intention of taking their lives. And they too noticed a change in the eyes just moments before they were attacked. And he said, you could lay that to a neural transmitter changing, like in the brain, and it comes through the eyes. And so what was going on with Bundy at that moment? What's going on with him is that not only was he in that altered state of murder, but once he sensed somebody was about to become his, even if they would ultimately get away, then that depth of perversity and violence and things would ramp up. And so Carlisle gave me the answer as to why that was. So, I don't know.
Well, so it's a physiological change. I mean, that's taking place. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Oh, yes. Based on what's going on inside him. So I don't know if Larry remembers, but Larry, did you notice any change in Bundy's eyes that night after you found him checking out women at the drive-in near the restroom?
That's a good question. I think I kind of remember he might have been irritated that,
Oh, I bet.
We came in and we found him. And so I assume that's, that would be what I would sense, is that he was irritated about the whole thing.
Yeah.
But he not only just changed his, yeah. No, he changed the way he looked a lot too. I mean, I've seen pictures of him. They looks like a completely different man. The hairstyle, the look in his eyes. I mean, it looked almost like he had different personalities.
Yeah, when you see those pictures, and I in fact, Kevin, I remember asking Kevin, how come he liked women with long dark hair parted in the middle, which was a common way we wore hair back then, But Kevin told me, he says, if he liked you and he knew you, he would not hurt you. And but when I saw those pictures, they had the several pictures of him. I think there were 6 or 8. I can't remember, but I thought he's got to have another personality or something, because this isn't the Ted Bundy I knew, and it didn't even look like him.
Well, Judge Hanson, when Bundy was on trial for the kidnapping of Carol DeRange in Salt Lake City, obviously, Judge, and of course it went to a bench trial, and both attorneys, prosecution and the defense, agreed to a bench trial, which means that there would be no jury; it would be up to the judge. And Judge Hanson was a fair judge, so everybody was, even Bundy's lawyer, John O'Connell, was okay with it. But Hanson said Bundy came into the court one morning and looked a certain way. They broke for lunch. He came back afterwards, and he said he looked like almost a completely different person. It was weird. I mean, it was enough for Hanson to notice how odd it was. And I don't think it had anything to do with a change of clothes. It wasn't. It was something to do with Bundy. Maybe he did something to his hair a little bit. Maybe he did, but he looked like a different person. And I don't think you can always lay it to, if you look at those pictures, he just looks so different. That's why they called this guy, he was like a chameleon. So yeah, very strange stuff. But again, getting back to that thing where he would be in that, and Francine has, she got to see him a lot. Francine, I just wanted to ask you, did you ever notice anything about him that, like in his eyes, did you ever notice any kind of a change at all?
There was one time I remember quite clearly. Leslie had asked me to watch Josh on a weekend. So they go water skiing. Her and Ted could go water skiing. They were going to go water skiing. And, of course I said yes. I mean, Josh was always over at my house anyway, and no problem at all. I'd love it. And
Right.
she called me the next day, and she said, "I'm sorry, Ted didn't come home last night." I think she said he probably went to he goes and visits his mother or something. And so there was always a reason. But I remember so little things like that. But one day, I was watching him, and he had just gotten back from his mom. And I don't know if it was that weekend or what had happened, but she asked me to draw. She was teaching school. And so it might have been on that Monday morning. I don't know. But she asked me to, go ahead and drop Josh off, after him and Larry were done playing at the house. And Ted was there. And so I took Josh over to, we walked up to the duplex, and I took him to the house, and the curtains were drawn, and, usually in the day, they're open. And I knocked on the door, and nobody answered. And so I knocked again, because she said he was there, and I could see someone peek out of the side of the curtain. And then they opened the door just enough so I could see him. And he looked, it was dark in that house. That whole house was so dark, and I didn't want to let Josh into the house. I just felt like, oh, this is strange. He's coming from this happy, fun place to this dark place. But, I had no reason really. But I remember looking at him, and he looked so worn out. He looked so, he looked terrible. He just did not look good. And I thought maybe he was sick. Yeah. I thought maybe something was wrong, so I left Josh there. And I think about it now. I think, how could I do such a thing? I mean, I had a couple of wake-up calls like that, but I remember that. And because he was always well put together. Whenever I'd see him, he was well put together, and he looked terrible. Mm-hmm. And so I remember I just had this foreboding feeling at that time, because the curtains were drawn. It was dark in the house. And do I let this little boy? Yeah, I remember that.
So question.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So question, Larry, Francine, how old was Larry at the time?
I think he was like 7, 8 years old, right around there.
Okay. So enough to still have cognitive memory.
Oh, yeah. Larry was always really sharp. He remembered a lot of stuff. I had to be careful with him. What
a great mom, Larry. You can't get better compliments than that. Wait.
He caused me some problems telling things he shouldn't be saying.
You've got a mom who used to hang out with Ted Bundy. How cool is that? You know, I mean, you can't get any better than that, you know? So you know how boys talk, right? 8, 9, 10. What were you and Josh talking about? Were there any one-offs that Josh would say to you, like, you know, hey, you know, are you getting where I'm going there? You know, we're not supposed to be here today, you know, bad day over in the living room here, like where your mom's described?
Yeah, one incident in particular was which might be what you're asking. Leslie was there, and we were at Josh's house. She was there, and Ted was there, and Ted was locked up in his room. The door was shut, and we were playing a board game, and I guess we were a little loud. She's like, "You guys need to go outside and play. You know, Ted's not feeling well or something. Things need to be quiet." This is the middle of the day. And I remember specifically seeing a food tray sitting on the floor outside the door, the bedroom door. And so he wasn't even letting Leslie in to bring him food. And, you know, middle of the day, I don't know, was it, you know, who knows where he was that whole night.
Didn't feel right, didn't look, did you ever get a sense of this instinct that there's danger around you in any way, if you remember?
A feeling, not like a sixth sense type of thing, but he took us swimming once, and he really upset. He scared the crap out of me.
What happened?
And, well, there was a swimming pool up by the University of Utah. University of Utah has a old military fort on it, Fort Douglas, and Fort Douglas had a swimming pool. And he took us swimming up there. He took us a few times, but Josh thought it was funny. He says, "You're going to love this game." You know, Ted calls it shark. Play shark. And, you know, I'm just a little guy, and I'm not this expert swimmer or anything. I mean, I can swim, but the rules were you had to swim across the deep end. And while you were swimming, he would come up under you like a shark. And I remember he came up under me and he pulled me down, and I remember panicking. He would bite you like a shark, you know, shark bite. And
Did he physically bite you? I mean, or was he using his hands?
He didn't draw blood, but yeah, he bit.
He used his mouth.
Yeah.
What that's interesting. Hang on to that thought right there, because Kevin, didn't he on some of his escapades and murders, biting was a big part of his MO, wasn't it?
Well, he did bite once, and it was purely an animalistic response. He bit the buttocks of, I believe it was Lisa Levy. Of course, it was one of the Chi Omega victims. But I think that's the only time he did that. But here's the thing about Bundy. The reason why Bundy would pull him under, I mean, and I wrote about that shark thing too, and I think that what he was doing there, he didn't want to hurt either boy, obviously, but he wanted to inflict a little fear because he enjoyed doing that. He admitted he enjoyed, you know, Liz said he would sometimes jump out from a bush and frighten me, and he'd done that to others. So he really enjoyed putting fear into people. And so that's what, I'm sure he thought that was funny, but it wasn't. And speaking of that, so as far as the biting is I don't know. I don't recall anybody else being bitten, but he did do that biting, and he had really screwed up teeth. And so, you know, the cops, you know, when they got there, even before they moved the body, somebody took a ruler and laid it next to and was measuring that bite mark. And, you know, after, of course, they made the dental molds of his teeth, of course, they matched perfectly. But I think that's the only time he bit. Now, some people think that he tortured victims physically. I would say no to that, except he could have done certain things that wouldn't be torture, necessarily, but one thing we do know, he did enjoy psychologically torturing victims. Here's the thing about Bundy. Here was his MO. Bundy's MO could change a little bit, but it was pretty standard. There were times when he would attack a victim, crash a tire iron into their head, and a couple of these victims woke up and began to talk, and he would have to hit them again to knock them out. He didn't want them conscious, and two of those were Julie Cunningham and Georgianne Hawkins. He wanted them completely out so that he could do what he wanted to. That's the kind of to them, and that's the kind of mental state he was in. However, there were times when he would, without question, psychologically torture people. And a good example of this was when he abducted Janice Ott around noon, maybe a few minutes before, at Lake Sammamish, and he took her in Washington State, and he took her to a location. We're not sure if it was a cabin, had her tied to a tree. We're just not completely sure. And of course, the sexual assaults would occur, but he kept her alive. And when he abducted Denise Naslund at around 4:30 p.m. At the lake again, back at the lake, trying to make a statement, and he wasn't also satiated, so he needed another victim. He took her back to where Janice was, and we wouldn't know that Janice was alive until later, and he admitted it. But what he was trying to do there, of course, here's Denise Naslund abducted by a man. She sees another, takes her to the place where Janice is. They're terrified. Bundy said there wasn't really anything spoken between them. I think they both knew where this thing was going. And he enjoyed that terror. He could have easily killed Ott and avoided that and then done whatever he wanted to with Naslund, but he didn't want to. So there was times when he would psychologically torture people. We know that. His MO was to, when he committed the murder, sometimes he'd have sex with them prior to which would be essentially a rape. He used to take photographs of them too, Polaroids. And when he was arrested in Salt Lake City, and they went and searched his apartment, this would be in October of 75. They, of course, didn't find any pictures because those were down in the utility room. And once he got out, he destroyed those. But he would take his time with a lot of these women, make them pose and things. And people suspect that the poses he would have them do would reflect what he had seen on the detective magazines.
Yeah.
If you remember those from the 1960s, there was like 6 of them that were published throughout the decades from the 1920s or 30s all the way to, I guess they stopped finally sometime in the 1980s, but they would have these large-breasted women on there. They'd be being attacked by a man.
Yeah.
Maybe he was choking her, or whatever. And so he used to like to, duplicate those. So he would take time with them. And when he did take time with them, some of this, of course, psychological terror would come out, but he normally murdered them, whether they were unconscious the whole time or not. And it really all depended on what Bundy wanted at the moment.
Interesting.
So, yeah, just terrible. But it's
one thing I wanted to say as a mother, my son, Larry, when he came home telling me, he looked at me, it must have upset him terribly because he looked at me and said, I don't want to go swimming with Ted anymore. And remember, I thought Ted was an okay guy. And I'm kind of, shocked. I said, well, why not? Because I wanted to find out, in my head, what popped in was, he's probably tried to touch my son inappropriately or something like this. And I said, why not? Yeah. And he goes, well, because he plays this game called Shark and he bites me. And in my head, I'm thinking, I used to mess around in the swimming pool and we push each other in the deep end and sometimes we dunk each other, but never did we scare each other like that. And that's, and he's a young kid and I'm thinking, oh my gosh. And I says, okay. I said, this is when I think my antenna really started to go up with Ted. And,
Yep.
and I said, okay, then you're not going swimming with anymore. You don't have to.
How long had you known him before this incident, if you remember?
It had been a while, enough that I trusted him, taking my son swimming, because he didn't just take him to Fort Douglas. Larry, didn't he take you to Fairmont Park as well?
Yeah, Fairmont Park. He took us to play tennis at Fairmont. At least that's all I remember about Fairmont and Ted was the tennis court.
Yeah, because he'd take him quite often. Fairmont Park was in the Sugar House area by where we lived at the time. And it was a nice park, family park. And I went there when I was a little girl, and I had good memories. And I, so he'd take him there. And then he started taking him up to, I remember when he took him up to Fort Douglas. But when Larry told me that, that really bothered me. And I thought, okay, I kind of put on my guard at about that point, with Ted.
Mhm.
So, out of curiosity, how did what do you think the signs were that Leslie may have seen? Did she ever share any of that, girlfriend to girlfriend? And then,
No,
Larry, tell me what
she was
your
very
thoughts are on
private.
that
She
question.
was very private in her life. She was very private. In fact, I remember when they arrested Ted in Salt Lake. I remember I was sitting in the living room, and Larry, I don't know if you were there or not. I can't remember if you were in bed or not, but I remember the news came on, and they said they had arrested Theodore Bundy. And I looked and I said, that's Ted, because I always called him Ted. I went, oh my God, that's Ted. And I couldn't believe it. I was shocked. And Leslie was a very private person. And the only thing I remember is she started packing her stuff. And I guess, it wasn't right there immediately. It was very shortly after that. And I went up there and she's packing, and she gave me some of Ted's stuff, which I don't know that I have it anymore. I think I gave Larry, don't you still have Ted? That we named the plant Ted. It was in a pot, and it was, yeah. So, and I did say, did you water
You
Ted?
named it Ted?
We named it Ted.
And it was it Bundy's flower pot?
Yeah. And she didn't want anything. She didn't want anything.
Is that the one behind you?
No,
No,
Larry has it. Larry, oh, that's it.
It was just, I think the plant looked just like that one, the type of plant.
Yeah, it was a sword.
But the pot is broken, but I have the pieces.
Oh my gosh.
It's kind of.
Yeah. So
I
we had that
remember
for
Leslie.
years and years.
Yeah.
So anyway, so she packed, go ahead, Larry. No, finish your thought.
No, that's what she was saying. She packed up. Boy, I remember Ted or Josh coming. He was crying. He's basically saying goodbye. So I'm not going to see you again. Said, I'm like, well, where are you? He said, we got to move. We got to leave.
Interesting.
So that was the end of Josh.
I think this, I can't, I know that a lot happened, I don't know if it was right immediately after. I do remember, that she moved quite far away. And I remember when he escaped out of Colorado, I was very concerned for her. And I called the FBI to let them know, where she was living, and because I was concerned that he would do something to her. But then Kevin kind of put me to rest on, he wouldn't hurt anybody that he knew or anything. So that was kind of good. But at that time, I was very concerned. And she was out, like she was boom, she was gone, and she had a job, her family here. So you can imagine what this has done to her, knowing that she was sharing time with this man who she loved and wanted to get married to. She was going to try to go to law school with him. They had plans. And for this to happen, what this must have done to her, it would be awful.
So
And
he's really living this. He's really living this. He's really living this facade.
All the time he's there, he's
Yeah.
killing people. And that year he was there, he's killing people around here. And she's got him in her home and with her son. And this is a fatal mistake a lot of women make. Sometimes they really don't know the history of the person they're bringing into their child's life or their life. And we trust them and we think they're going to be okay. One thing I do want to say about Kevin's book, though, and how Kevin and I got connected, I had read a lot of Ted Bundy books. But when I read Kevin's because they never mentioned him living in Utah with Leslie or on this street, it was never mentioned, that he was involved with another woman while he's pretending he's loving this other woman. And I saw Kevin's book it was Ted Bundy, A Comprehensive History. And I was amazed. Kevin had everything on this timeline and everything was so accurate. I just had to reach out to him and say, I am so glad that you finally, you brought this up. Yeah.
And so, Kevin, tell us, I mean, you've written 16 books, and,
Yes.
so tell us about the investigative part of, how you connected Bundy's life to these crimes in your writings as a whole.
Well, it is an interesting story, and I have to say, anytime I'm on a show or a podcast or whatever, I'll say that, well, I never had any intention of writing about Ted Bundy, but I have a friend, he's passed away now, Jim Massey. He was a probation and parole officer here in Kentucky for, he retired out of it. I guess he was there about maybe 27, 28 years, but back in, when I met Jim, which is probably around 2000 and maybe 2002, maybe, I'm not sure. He had known Jerry Thompson for 20 years or more. He had known him since the early 1980s. But anyway, we would talk about Thompson. Well, Thompson told Jerry Thompson told my friend Jim Massey he was coming to Louisville. So Jim knew I was a fledgling writer. I had one book published and another book finished, and it was going to go to I was shopping it to a publisher. So he was aware of all that, and he invited me to dinner with them. And on the morning, in the morning of the day when Thompson got here and we were supposed to meet for dinner, Jim called me and let me know and where we're going to meet. And I said, great, I'm looking forward to it. At the time I was writing some articles for, I wasn't on staff, but I would submit articles to a paper called a print weekly newspaper called Snitch about crime and the law. And it was published in 5 states at the time, although it originated here in Louisville, also published in Lexington, Kentucky. And it turns out that I thought, well, maybe this would make a nice little article to write about, and I'll send it to Snitch, and it'll become a feature for that week. Anyway, so he said right before we stopped talking, and I was about ready to hang up the phone, he said he brought the bag, and I said, wait, what bag? He said Ted Bundy's murder kit. I said, oh, really? And I had remembered that he had talked about Jerry having that kit because, he had been convicted for the crime of the Carol DeRoche thing. Then he was transferred to Colorado and escaped there twice, made his way to Florida, killed there and executed. So they didn't know what to do with the bag. Jerry said, give it to me. I'll use it as a teaching tool in crime seminars, which he did. Well, he brings the bag to Louisville. He turns it over to Jim for they were here, I think, 4 days. He said, just take the bag. I know you'd like to look at, maybe show your friends down at probation and parole. And so I called Jim up one night. So we have a nice dinner. We talk around the pool, and I get to interview Jerry, and he's a really nice guy. And I got his autograph in one of the books that I had on Bundy. And a couple nights later, I called Jim. I said, would you mind if I brought this stuff to my house? I'd like to photograph it. He said, sure. I came and got it. It was dark by this time. And as I drove home with this bag in my passenger seat, just like Bundy used to have it, and I would pass under you know, street lamps, and it would illuminate it. Called my wife and I said, I'm bringing Ted Bundy's murder kit in the house. So if there's anything on the dining room table, if we could clear it off. She wasn't too happy.
Man.
She wasn't too happy about the murder kit coming. So I brought it there. My son-in-law was there, and we arranged it, took photographs, and I released those photographs to the internet years ago. Before Thompson left, he and his wife, Jean, nice people. He, like I say, he died a few years ago. Jim said, I want you to meet us back over at the hotel at the Breckenridge Inn, which was just torn down like 6 months ago here in Louisville, and they're putting up another building, but not too far from my house. And as we got there and talked again, Jerry gave me one of the large Glad green trash bags that from Bundy's murder kit that he used to put the victim's clothes in, that he would dump somewhere down the road, not anywhere near the body. And he gave Jim one. And I said, Jerry, would you mind writing us both a letter of authentication? And he did so. And I went into the hotel and I thought it would be nice to have it on some letterhead of the hotels, the Breckenridge Inn. And so he did that. I still have that. And so what happened to me was, I did write the article of Snitch. I thought that would be it, but it wasn't. It kept really churning in me to write about Bundy. Well, my hope was, and even Jim said, don't do it. He's been done to death. But there have been no books published about Bundy for many years. And so I said, well, I'm going to anyway. Sometimes you got to go with what you know on the inside. Well, when I was halfway through the book, I was finding out brand new information about the murders that had never been published before, but were confirmed by the record or the detectives, the main detectives I dealt with, and a lot of new general information about the case. And I knew when I was halfway through the book, I had something special on my hands. And so I was able, once I completed it, it was a 2.5 year, I want to say, marathon journey, because it was really working night and day on that thing every day, 7 days a week. And I was able to sell it to a publisher, even without the help of an agent, within about 3 weeks. And another publisher, I'd sent out 6 query letters. Another publisher quickly contacted me and said, we'd like to sign you right here for this book. And I said, I can't. I've already signed the contract with someone else. But when the book was released, and nobody knew who I was, it took time for the book to build. But once it did start to build and people got to read this, they became very interested in it. And they saw that it contained stuff that the other books did not. And in fact, a friend of mine had lunch with Stephen Michaud, the writer of The Only Living Witness, along with Hugh Ainsworth, and they also wrote Conversations of a Killer. He was talking to Michaud, and my friend had my book with him, The Bundy Murders. Michaud picked it up and he said, there are things in this that even I didn't know, which was considered a great compliment, because Michaud knows the case extremely well. But that's just the kind of digging I did. And I wouldn't stop until I found an answer for what I was looking for. And I wasn't able to uncover a lot of new things. So after a while, documentarians were calling me from the UK. It took much longer. I mean, for the U.S., for some reason, for the U.S. documentarians starting to use my book as a guide for their programs, but they did, and I noticed it, and they started contacting me to do their shows, and they were using it as a guidebook. And and when people ask, I had a guy from Hollywood call me, and he said, Kevin, I think Reels is using your book because they're following it so closely. I said they are. In fact, I'll be on the show. He had some foreknowledge of it, and so he said, well, I could tell they were, and so I think what the documentarians were going to do was try to get it right, because a lot of the documentaries, and I don't know why this is, but a lot of the documentaries, before they started getting a hold of my book, The Bundy Murders, had them focusing almost entirely on Bob Keppel and everybody in Washington State. with sprinklings of things in Utah and Florida, but it really centered on them. And the truth of the matter is they didn't catch him. He was caught in Utah, and he was finally put to death in Florida. And in fact, Mike Fisher, who worked very closely with me, the Colorado investigator, he was the first person to get a murder warrant placed against Bundy for the murder of Karen Campbell from the Wildwood Inn. So anyway, it just took off like that. And what has driven, I've written the Bundy murders and then 5 other additional books on Bundy, all of which have brand new information in it, testimonies from people who are valid contacts with Bundy. And it's all been driven since the Bundy murders by people contacting me, and I would interview them, and I'd have this information. And if I wasn't going to write another book, I wouldn't know what to do with it. But I thought, why should this go into the dustbin of history? I know about it and no one else does. So my publishers were always on board with printing another book because it had so much new information in it. And then when I finally got done with what I thought was going to be done with Bundy, I got more information, and I thought, this is really astounding. Should I let this go? And I discussed it with some people, and they say, no, I wouldn't let it go either. So after writing 6 books about Bundy, the main one being the Bundy Murders Comprehensive History, which is a full bio of Bundy and a full treatment of the murders, I started writing a thing called the Yearly Journal, and I put one out, and I said I would probably do this yearly. It looks like it's going to be every couple of years because I'm writing a huge book on the Nazis and the Holocaust, not just with the Jews, but people in the East and, the Eastern peoples that they called Untermenschen. So I'm on this big other book, so it's probably going to have to wait. But as new information comes in, I just keep publishing stuff, and people just keep contacting me. Now, a lot of people that contact me, I can't include their information because they're lacking things. They weren't in the area when they thought it was Bundy, and they thought it was Bundy, but it turned out not to be. But so this thing has kind of rolled on its own, and I'm very pleased about it because every time a book was published that I published about Bundy, and by the way, those 6 volumes are like 1,482 pages altogether.
Yeah, they're utilized obviously in law enforcement circles. They're pretty much the Bible.
Oh, yeah.
They're pretty much the Bible. If you want to understand, what this guy outside of, going to the BAU and, tapping into their minds a little bit, because early on,
sure.
You were kind of the cutting edge once you took the project on to connect those dots.
One thing Kevin's put out.
Go ahead, Francine. Go ahead.
Oh, one thing that Kevin has put out that's really, it's the encyclopedia, Kevin, that you put out.
Yes, it is. I have an encyclopedia. It's an interesting story about that. I had a guy contact me 2 days after one of my Bundy books came out. And he said, have you thought about writing an encyclopedia about the Bundy murders? I said, do you realize I just got done with the book? It was just published 2 days ago, and we both laughed about that. And he said, well, I do a lot of the Civil War stuff, and I don't have time for it. If I did, I would do it myself. I said, well, let me put that on the back shelf, and I'll see what happens. And after a few days of thinking about it, I thought, well, that kind of sounds like a good idea. It might even be fun to write because I'll get to contact people who used to write newspaper articles about them, and it might be an interesting thing to do. And I don't have to go into a lot of murders or whatever, that dark stuff at all. I just have to kind of tell what role people had in the case. And so I said, well, I told him, I said, I'll run it by my publisher. I did. They liked the idea immediately. So I started on that. And then that turned into the encyclopedia of the Ted Bundy murders. So
and that's a really good thing. If people want to just grab something and just kind of, look at it, it's really good.
Yeah. And we'll have all those links below at the end of the podcast.
Yeah, because that is, I love the books and Audible is, I listen to these, when I'm driving around and stuff, but that's really fun. In fact, that's Kevin, did talk to me, and I think I did a couple of pictures. I can't remember how many I did, Kevin. We took pictures of in Salt Lake, where Ted lived. Okay, there. So the duplex where Larry would go play with Josh is there, and wasn't his original? Didn't we take a photo of the original place that he moved into prior to moving in with Leslie? Wasn't that an apartment?
Well, that was at 565 First Avenue.
Yeah.
And now I got pictures of that myself, but I remember you were very kind to do that for me, and I gave you credit in the book.
Oh, yeah, I just was wondering about that one that was one more, right around there, that two-story where you go up the stairs.
Yeah, that was 364 Douglas Avenue.
Yeah, so I was wondering about that one. Tell us about that.
Well, if you look at 364 Douglas Avenue, it looks identical to when Bundy was there. He lived in the upstairs apartment, and he walked up those steps. And I was told by a fella that is also a researcher, and he said that, when Bundy brought that truck from Washington State, even though he originally moved there with a lot of stuff in his car, his VW, he went back, got his brother Glenn to move back with his truck loaded with furniture and stuff like that. This researcher told me that truck was parked in the garage in the back for quite some time. I think even after Bundy, was jailed, and then, so I don't know what happened to that truck, but it was there. But 364 Douglas, as well as 565 First Avenue, they all look exactly alike. I mean, if Bundy were back, he'd recognize it immediately. People that lived in 565 First Avenue know it's been virtually unchanged. However, if you go, I didn't ever go into Bundy's apartment, but if you go into Bundy's apartment, that has been remodeled, so it probably looks pretty much different than what. Then I think the wall was knocked out too. But as far as it goes, Bundy lived today. He lived in number 2, the apartment 2, and back then 2 was at the top of the steps on the right, and now it's 5, and so they've got 2 marked on the bottom. So if you don't know any better, you just go up there, you think, oh, well, here's his apartment. No, his was upstairs, up the steps. But in any event, yeah, great pictures you got, Francine, of the duplex.
Well, I was excited because I felt an honor you asked me, because I had never, thought of those. Well, there is that other picture where it was by a bank, where he got a picture. Yes. Can you tell us about that?
Well, now the bank picture, I don't think I used that one. I don't think.
No, but I remember getting that. But didn't he get somebody there?
Well, here's what happened there. Louise Cannon, who is she doesn't like to go on podcasts, but I got her name from Carol Bartholomew, who was a Bundy. Well, she's not a survivor, but she knew Bundy as her husband, Wayne Bartholomew. But there's a famous picture before Carol and Wayne were married, taken by Wayne, and she was a pretty blonde lady. Well, she's still alive, I think. And she's standing there, like doing the dishes with Bundy, and he's got this, he's trying to be funny, but it almost looks like an evil smile, a smirk, and he's like holding the rinsing gun at her. And that's a famous picture. Well, that was Wayne who took that, and then later Wayne started dating Carol Hall, and she became Carol Bartholomew. Anyway, Carol, after I interviewed her, she also gave me the name of Louise Cannon, and Louise Cannon worked in the bank that was very close, kind of like just catty corner, 2 blocks from where Bundy's place was at 364 Douglas. You could, in fact, you come out of the 364, you just walk to the corner, you could see the bank. And so he liked her, Louise, and he had no plans to murder her. There were women that Bundy wanted to date, and then there were women Bundy wanted to murder, and he didn't really want to murder anybody. He knew he would tell investigators this in Florida. Anyway, so he would do things. He would come and always stand in her line, and she would talk to him. And there was a woman. This is so bizarre but cool at the same time. There was another teller that worked there. When she saw Bundy, she would not wait on him. And when Louise asked why, she said, "He's a killer. Look at those eyes." And of course, nothing had come out about Bundy. He hadn't been arrested yet. I mean, he hadn't been arrested. He hadn't come forth as to who he was. He had his August arrest, but that hadn't gone into the public, and for evading an officer. But anyway, this was before the big thing broke about him, and she wouldn't wait on this guy. Anyway, Bundy was trying to do things. He'd always talk to Louise. When it snowed there, he would come up there, because a lot of times after she would leave the teller position and the bank would close, Louise told me that the drive-through would remain open, and she would work the drive-through, and he would come over there if there's snow, and he'd wipe the car off. And one day he said, "Can we just go down the alley and have coffee at this place?" She said, "Sure," and they went down and they had coffee. Well, this is so astounding, and I'm so glad I was able to discover this. By the way, outside of the detectives, I asked Louise, "Have you ever been interviewed by a writer?" She said, "No. I mean, I was interviewed by the detectives, but that's it." I said, "Okay, well, that's interesting." And so anyway, she said that Louise said that on October 18th, and she knew Bundy, and he was very talkative. That's the normal Bundy. That's without the entity coming up. She ran in. She was going to meet her girlfriends, at a bar called the Widow McCoy's. Now, there's one there today, but it's not the original location in Salt Lake. And she went there, and as she passed through, she looked to the right, and she saw Ted was sitting at the bar. And she said, "Hi, Ted." And he was just sipping a bourbon or something. It wasn't a beer. He was drinking hard alcohol. And Bundy would often jumpstart himself into hunting through the use of alcohol. It would just, like an elixir, but help him get going. But she said, when I talked to Ted, and again, this is in one of the companion volumes, she said Ted was not his talkative self. He said, "Oh, hi, Louise." And they just spoke for just a second. And she said, "I went on to my table, and she said, we were talking, me and my girlfriends, and the next time I looked over, he was gone." Well, this was about 8:30 at night. This was not too far from a place called the Pepperoni Pizza Place, or Palace, or something. And Chief Lewis Smith's daughter, Melissa, was in that pizza place that night. Probably got there, I don't know, close to when Louise maybe saw Bundy at the bar. And Bundy must have made his way, and there was a testimony saying that somebody said they saw Bundy in that same restaurant where Melissa was on the night she disappeared. Now, whether that's true, and he gave her a ride from there, offered to give her a ride, or if he went ahead of her and waited and attacked her, which I think that's exactly what happened. Even if he wasn't at the pepperoni place, he spotted her. And the reason why he was drinking, he was getting ramped up to hunt. And there was a woman, strange incident. She's out I guess Melissa left around 10:30. She called home, I guess, close to 10, told her sister, Jolene, she'd be home soon. Not that long of a walk, but you do have to go through some darkened areas, and you pass by a school. Anyway, Bundy spotted her at some point, maybe 10:30, 10:45, and a woman out raking her leaves very close by heard a single scream of a female, as I say in the book, pierce the night air. And it had to have been Bundy. What Bundy did was he was in full attack mode, and he probably jumped out from behind a parked car. He probably pulled ahead of her, and as she walked by, she saw him running towards her from a very short distance with a crowbar and only had time to let out that one scream. Well, seeing Bundy at that time, she didn't put any connection to any of this. But later, when it came out about the disappearance of Melissa Smith, and of course the body was found long before they knew it was Bundy. Once all of this came out, she said, "My God, that's the same night I met my girlfriend." And so, it's just an astounding thing. So, this Bundy case is like pieces of the puzzle to things. And there's a tremendous amount of information we know about him. But sometimes these other little pieces come into focus. And I know a guy who's writing a book on Bundy now who had a similar experience, and a little piece of the puzzle has come into focus on something that occurred on the same night that he killed Brenda Ball. And of course, that'll come out in his book. But the thing of it is, it's cool when these things happen. You know why it's great? It's because we are forever getting the information out there for researchers and others who just want to read about the case, about something that would otherwise be lost to history.
Well,
Yeah,
when you talk about this woman who, saw him at the bar, and they talked casually, the one thing I really recall is how engaging he was to talk to. When I would talk to him, in fact, when he'd come to pick up Josh sometimes at my house, we'd sit and talk. And I wanted to go to law school because Ted and I had talked about it. It was something that I thought, well, after my kids are raised, I want to know what law school's like. And we talk about it. And he'd listen. He was a wonderful listener. And he would give you really good, he'd talk to you and he'd answer your questions, very intelligent. And he was so handsome and he was so engaging. So when these women, like when you talk about, Melissa and stuff, you think, why would they go with somebody like this? He had something very endearing about him, very engaging. He was handsome. And I know in the 70s, and as ludicrous as it sounds, I remember, growing up and we always thought as a stranger, they look like a stranger. A killer would look like a killer, and you got to watch out for people that don't look like. That's how we were raised. And so when they're kind and they're engaging like this, you would never expect it. So it would be easy to lure somebody if, because he had that ability. And I do believe he also got badges from pawn shops. And he used that here in Utah.
Sure. Yeah, he did. Yeah.
So he looked credible all the way around.
Yeah. Well, when Georgianne Hawkins in Washington State, Bundy got her on June 11th, like around 12:30 or so, coming up the alley and struggling on crutches, and she was going back to her. She had been with a friend. She sent the friend on ahead about 150 feet, 100 feet to her sorority house. Said, "I'm going to be there soon. I'm just going to go upstairs at this fraternity house and see my boyfriend for a few minutes." Well, Bundy called her and asked her to help him. He was struggling on crutches with a briefcase. He had a split in his pants and a leg cast on up to the knee. And of course, Georgianne Hawkins was so aware that there was a guy out there snatching women. But when she saw Bundy, obviously crippled, which he wasn't, and struggling on crutches, holding a briefcase, of course she could offer help. And Bundy told Bill Hagmeyer, the FBI guy, which I interviewed Bill twice. He's really nice. He said, he told Hagmeyer, I would play on the kindness of how these women were brought up. Okay. So that if I was hurting and something, they would be willing to help.
Well, not only that though, Kevin, he got baptized, didn't he, in Utah? So he would be accepted?
Well, he did run to the Mormon church and tried to insulate himself with them because such pressure was on him with the police. And that's where Larry Anderson comes in, and John, what's his name? I'm sorry, I forgot his last name. John Homer, and Carol Bartholomew comes in. For example, Larry Anderson told me things. Larry was good friends with Bundy, and Larry, when Bundy was put to death, one of the national tabloids contacted him and offered him a lot of money to tell everything that he knew about Bundy, his dealings with him. He refused. I contacted Larry because I had worked with Carol Bartholomew on my second book, The Trail of Ted Bundy, digging up the untold stories. I mean, the book wasn't finished. She gave me Larry's name, contacted him first. So Larry worked with me, didn't ask for a penny, which I wouldn't have paid. I don't do that. But he told me all about Ted, and some really phenomenal stories came out of what happened with him and Ted. And so, Bundy knew how to work people. One thing Larry told me, this is why I'm bringing this up. Larry said that very often they would be in a group of people in the church, talking. Bundy was an observer of people. And he said a lot of times, even though Bundy would talk, I could see he would sit there, he would observe people, and he was listening. You talk about him being a good listener. He was listening to others. In fact, he and John Homer, and I don't know which it was, if it was Larry or John, I think it was Larry, but they used to go out and double date with Mormon women in the church. And I said, how was Bundy with those women? He said, perfectly fine, gentlemanly, just the perfect date. But he was an observer of people. And again, thankfully, Carol believed that she thought that picture may have saved her life. I don't, because, hey, look, I had a connection with Ted Bundy, and so maybe that's why he didn't murder me. But really, Bundy was not going to murder anybody he knew. He just wouldn't do that. He told people in Florida, detectives in Florida, I don't hurt people I know. So there were the women he wanted to date and have sex with, and there were the women that he wanted to murder. And those he usually did not want to know very well. So much so, very often he would knock them out, and just like a doll, he could play with them, and they wouldn't be interfering with him.
Did he always knock them out with the crowbar?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I was so weird. I was driving down the street one day, coming home with my wife from a steakhouse, and I saw a short, I knew it was about 18 inches. It was like 17 and a half, 18 inches crowbar. And I said to my wife, I said, that's like the Sears model 5677 that Bundy carried. He carried a short crowbar so that he could maneuver that in a car and whack these women in the back of the head. She said, you should go back and get it. And I said, no. I said, wait a minute, I think I will. I drove back around it and I got it. And it's exactly, I don't know if it's Sears, but it's old, really old. And it's either that or a model exactly like it. And it's
and he'd keep that, would he keep that in that little bag? Or what, just out? So
when he was hunting, he kept that placed behind his driver's seat.
Oh, okay.
And the woman, if he was hunting and he picked somebody up and they sat in the seat, he could then strike her in the head. Now, very often he would remove the passenger seat.
Now that's what I wanted to ask Larry, because when he picked up Larry, wasn't that seat? Didn't you say something, Larry, about that something was different about his car when you got in?
I just remember something being off about it. I was talking to my friend Scott recently, and we were talking about Bundy, and he was another kid in the neighborhood, but he didn't spend much time around Ted. But he did remember getting in the car or being around the car, and he said he remembered something odd too. I don't know if it was the door handle or the seat, but
that's what you told me when Ted brought you back with the bike.
No way to get out.
So the bike he put in the front of the Volkswagen.
Yeah.
So he brought up. He brought up. It was hard to get out. The handle or something was missing. You were saying it was hard to get out.
Yeah, I can remember something off about it. But
go ahead, Cap.
I can tell you that the seat, a woman that was interviewed, I think her Margaret Maughan, whose father was a Utah Supreme Court judge who actually had to recuse himself because of his daughter's relationship with Ted Bundy. But Margaret said that somebody else got this information, and then I was able to read it out of a court paper. But when she said, when I was sitting in the passenger seat, it would rock. He had taken it off and on so many times that it had stripped something. And she said, I literally had to hold on to the handle above their heads. Now, I don't know whether Bundy ever played with the door handle. There might have been something just naturally wrong with the car. We don't know that. There are some people out there that said that he did. I haven't ever found any proof for that. And in fact, the one woman who said the door handle was removed, and she was able to escape Bundy. Just a few weeks later, he got Carol DeRodge in his car. She escaped too, but the door handle was there and she got out easily. And Bundy, in fact, jumped out of the driver's seat over the passenger seat and chased her. But the bottom line is that seat did rock. And when Jane Curtis went to Bundy's car at Central Washington State College before he got Susan Rancourt, she looked in and she said, I was really troubled when I looked into his car. The passenger seat was gone. And if he knew he was going to be hunted, he might take that out, put it in his apartment, or sometime, like when he was arrested on August 16th, 1975, trying to evade a police officer, the seat was, the front passenger seat was laying in the back, and Bundy had his murder kit up where that was, and the tools of the trade of murder were spilling out of it. So he said he wasn't hunting that night. He absolutely was hunting, or that would have been, or that bag would have been zipped up or whatever, and just, placed maybe in the back seat. But he was hunting, and when he would take that off, if he would attack somebody with a crowbar, as he did with Deborah Kent, as he followed her out of Viewmont High School up in Belleville, cracked her in the head. He put her in there, had to have thrown a blanket over her, and actually went back into the school and sat down for a few minutes and was seen by others. Except this time, rather than nicely dressed, shirt tail was half hanging out. He looked winded. His hair was askew. And I think the reason why he went back into the school was because he knew she was out cold, and he didn't want to be seen as leaving at the exact same time that she had walked out that door. She walked out the door on the western side. He ran around to the front, went out the front door, and ran down a sidewalk, and inadvertently had lost his handcuff key on that sidewalk. It bounced off, I think, into the grass or the gravel. And that was found the next day by the Bountiful police officers. But in any event, that's what he would do. He would lay them down there, cover them with a blanket, and off he would go. So those are things that he did. But he absolutely stripped that seat. That he just damaged it to where it would just rot when people were in there.
Well, I tell you what, we could probably go on for another 3 or 4 hours. I'm sure of it. But I want to thank every one of you for being here today. I mean, this has been an amazing TED Talk, as we will coin that. I mean, the takeaways here, Larry, obviously you haven't been playing very many shark games, in your life, right? I'm sure you have not played that with your children at all.
It was terrifying. Being pulled underwater was the worst part.
And that's just kind of probably the tip of the iceberg. But the fact that you were, you came into contact with somebody, the polar opposite of good. I mean, the complete, pendulum swing to evil, is absolutely phenomenal. That the universe is on schedule and your life had a main purpose ahead of it, and here you are, continuing to thrive as a good father. But so thank you, Larry, for sure, for being here. And I can't say thank you enough. Francine, what can I say about my dear friend over there? You have brought so much joy and happiness to so many people by just the forensics work that you do in your life and the investigative work that you've did. I do have a question. Did he influence you in any way into your law enforcement career?
That's interesting you bring that up. I have thought about this a long time. He did. I was going to go into law. In fact, when my kids were pretty much raised, I did go to the university, and my desire was to become a lawyer. I went through my schooling so that I could go into law school. However, I didn't, because after I became a single parent, they wouldn't let me go my first year unless I could only work 12 hours a week, which I couldn't do. But as I reflected on this and where I am today, so that's been many years. Ted Bundy comes into my life. He brings up the desire that I want to do this, and I gave that up for another reason, for my children. So I couldn't do it. And then my whole life eventually started moving in a direction of working with law enforcement and in the criminal justice system in different areas. I have probably gone the whole circular path of the criminal justice system in every way for over 35 years. And now here I am. I've worked with law enforcement, all this stuff, and now here I am specifically focusing on solving cases so that I can help bring closure of some sort to law enforcement and to families, although there will never be closure. And I've reached out to Kevin on some things because it looked like during that time it could have been a Ted Bundy when I found a skull that's been cracked with a crowbar. Kevin's, given me some good insight and stuff, but it was pivotal. It was strange how it starts out there and I end up here doing this sort of thing. So I will say yes.
And can I say something?
Absolutely. You're going to have the final word, Kevin. In fact, if you wouldn't mind adding a couple of real keen takeaways of your research on Ted that would help women empower themselves to look for certain things. And then when you're done, also tell everybody about your, where they can find your books. And when you're done, we have a tradition here on the interview room. We play a song called Hawaii. So as the moment when you're done, we're going to cut to Hawaii, and we'll end the broadcast at that point. So you have the final word, friend.
Okay. Well, I'd like to say that before I became a writer, and I did that, I wrote my first book it was published in 1990, December of 95. But I had been in the ministry, and I still am today. I still have my hand in it in various areas, as long as being a writer. But I had decided in my 30s, in my early 30s, to join the police department and here in Louisville, and they were under a hiring freeze, and they took my information and they said, well, we'll definitely contact you after that hiring freeze goes away. I said, great. And they didn't contact me for about 6 months, and they were ready to get the ball rolling, and I was going to come in. But in the interim, I had injured my leg, and it was going to prevent me from doing what I wanted to do, because the injury was serious enough that it had lasting issues with it. And my idea was to become a patrolman for a number of years, and then work my way up to detective, hopefully in homicide. So that was scratched. And so I said, I really hate to say this, but I had this injury and I can't do it. So anyway, but then of course, after that, I started writing true crime. So I think in the end, despite the leg, I still went the way I was supposed to go. Anyway, that's an interesting thing. Otherwise, I would have ended up maybe not writing and just being a detective. Anyway, just because I felt like it would be interesting and I could be geared to that. As to the women and the takeaway with Bundy, back in the 1970s, a lot of women were hitchhiking. A lot of young women were unaware of the dangers. You don't see a lot of hitchhiking anymore out of women. Thank God that serial killers have not stopped. They have to be exceedingly more careful because of not just forensics and DNA, which I won't get into it here, but it would change some things of the way Bundy did things. And also for the many cameras that are placed within cities and on our cell phones. And so these people wouldn't stop murdering. They would just have to be more careful. And Bundy, if he were alive today, he would not stop killing. He would merely adapt himself and be taking people, what you might say, on the edges of things, maybe in more secluded locations. But women overall have seemed to, and I'll tell you something, women are big true crime readers, maybe even more in some areas than men. And so there's been a real shift. And I think women in general have to be more careful, and they are. And I would say to younger women, do not take rides from people you don't know, unless they're well known by friends that you have. Just don't be fooled always by the outward appearance and the smile and the suave way in which they speak, because they might not be who they say they are. So women need to be careful. Women need to be careful more than men. Men need to be careful too, but many times men who kill women, they don't really mess with men. Bundy was practically terrified of getting in confrontations with other men and always tried to avoid it. He would look to those that he could dominate, which were women, and he would play on their good side. So as long as women are aware and they, there's a different character at night, you spend a lot of times out in the middle of the night, you're going to run into different characters than you do during the day. And of course, the police have a term, high-risk victims and low-risk victims, and they have those terms for a reason. And if you live a low-risk life, chances are you're going to be okay. If you live a higher-risk life, you hitchhike, you're out at nights, you're walking alone, you have a far greater chance of something happening. How about the woman that jumped into the wrong car thinking it was her Uber and the man murdered her? It's just astounding sometimes what happens in life. But just the big takeaway with Ted Bundy is don't believe everything you see. As far as my books are concerned, you can check out my books on Amazon. I think I've got 16 or 17 now. I'm working on another one, as I said, about the Nazis. We'll be returning to the Bundy Journal next, and then I've got another one about World War II that I'm going to write after that. So you can go there, and you can also go to Wild Blue Press, and you can go to their author drop down and click on that, and you find my name, and it will not only show a good number of my books, but I've written blogs over the years, and so they have all of those archived, and so you can tap into those as well. So that's about it for me. Thank you so much for having me.
Hard working every day, I'm stressed out, 24/7, babe. No timeouts, wish we could fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah, make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away, you and me, go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. I need a summer breeze, some fresh air to put my mind at ease. No cares. You wanna come with me? Me and you go to our favorite tree. Are you ready now? We jump on a plane. we're taking away, yeah, we're taking away. We'll never come down, we're going away, yeah, we're going away, you and me. Feeling the sun on my face in a while.